you are now like a single parent with an elephant on your back because you now have to co-parent with somebody who may be doing terrible things, saying terrible things. You have to have realistic expectations. You are no longer going to be able to run your child's life like a well-oiled machine. You're going to understand that there's a house in which maybe they're eating Cheetos and going to bed at 11 o'clock, playing video games all weekend. And that's the realistic expectation. It means that sadly at your home, you may need to double down on rules, on order, getting homework done. It may mean that 95% of the homework gets done on your watch and 5% on their watch. You are never going to convince the narcissistic co-parent to do it your way. And if you keep pushing, you're going to take a tense situation and turn it into an explosive device.
I'm Summer.
And I'm Mike.
And we got married with children.
It's been 12 years since we got this gang together.
And we're still running the rapids of living with a blended family.
And sometimes that is just not easy.
If you're looking for support and tools when it comes to divorce, step-parenting, co-parenting, and giving it your best,
you're in the right place.
We're talking about everything.
You ready to get this party started?
Always. Hello, and welcome back to another Everything Always podcast episode. Let me ask you this. How many times have you heard the word narcissist thrown around? I will tell you that most of my life I have heard this word, and I would figure that it was somebody who was totally self-absorbed and only cared about money and themselves. That's the word you threw around for that type of person. And that was it. I didn't really do any kind of research on it, why there were these certain characteristics. I just knew that people would call their ex a narcissist or a parent a narcissist. They would call their political leaders or their friends or maybe a business partner a narcissist. They just kind of threw out that label. And it just kind of meant to me, they must be a jerk and self-absorbed. And I would hear certain characteristics and it would get me thinking about certain people in my life, certain relationships, whether it was friends or people I did business with. I would see these same characteristics. And when Mike and I started this podcast, I can tell you that the majority of stories and questions that we received and still do would clearly state in their submission, my ex is a narcissist or my partner's ex is a total narcissist. And then that's how they would frame the story. And so back a couple of years ago, we decided to do a deep dive on what a narcissist is. And the reasons behind this were, one, to create some sort of clarity on what actually a narcissist is and define what determines that somebody is a narcissist beyond just you're a jerk, you're self-absorbed. There has to be more to it because there's some people that just have those characteristics, but just happen to be maybe a mean person and not necessarily a narcissist. And then the other reason was really to give best practices on how to deal with these type relationships in your life when, especially in a blended family situation, you just simply can't get rid of that person in your life, whether it's an in-law or an ex or a partner's new spouse, ex-partner's new spouse. There's all these different areas in a blended family where you're kind of stuck with that person. So how do you navigate that to make your life easier and more calm? And as the universe would have it at that time, my good friend, Joe Polish, who I may have mentioned before, he runs Genius Network, which is this exclusive group for entrepreneurs. So he and I were talking on the phone and we were talking about experiences with narcissists. And he told me, I'm going to send you some videos that you should watch. So immediately after our call, he sent me a handful of videos. And this is when I was introduced to Dr. Ramani and her YouTube channel, which I very quickly became obsessed with. So Dr. Ramani is a clinical psychologist. She's a professor of psychology. She's an author, media expert. And let me just tell you this, when you search up the word narcissism on the internet, or especially YouTube, she's who's going to come up. She is incredible. You will see all of these videos and all of these incredibly amazing tips on how to identify, how to deal with the narcissist, and the tactics that they use. And she releases these videos just about every day. So I started watching these videos and my mind was totally blown. It was if she was describing people I knew in the past to the T. I actually very quickly identified who I assumed was a narcissist was not, and who I wasn't quite sure was, no, that person's way too charming to be one, but oh my gosh, they totally are. My own diagnosis. But I was just seeing these characteristics and it blew my mind because she was literally describing things to the absolute T. So after that, Mike and I immediately put these notes together and we said, we have to do a podcast on this, especially with the amount of people that are writing in about this very topic. And at the time, before diving into all of this, I didn't really have a specific reason why I had to distance myself from certain people. It was like kind of hard to identify. I just knew there were certain things that were just icky and I couldn't have those people in my life. And now looking back, it is so clear why, or it is so clear why certain relationships or partnerships were just very difficult and unsettling. So Joe Polish, again, being Joe, then sent me another video of when him and Dr. Ramani were together at his office having a conversation, and he made this introduction. And I was thrilled because now I've become obsessed with all of her videos. So I'm so excited that I'm so thankful for Joe for introducing me to her. And I'm beyond grateful and so ecstatic that Dr. Ramani is on this podcast with me today. Not only has she educated me on this topic, but she has given the most effective advice that you can give on how to deal with all of the toxic things that narcissists do to keep you in their control, and understanding, what their motive is and really the psychology behind it. So listeners, if you are, and I know most of you are because that's why you're listening, and you've told us, if you are co-parenting with a narcissist, if you're wondering if he or she really is a narcissist, or perhaps your spouse's ex or your ex's spouse is a narcissist, you are going to want to hear every minute of this episode, because we're going to be defining narcissism and how to identify a narcissist. Dr. Ramani is going to give you solid advice on how to co-parent with one, what to do when you're worried about it affecting your children and how they are going to turn out. You're going to hear how to make sure you don't get into a relationship with a narcissist. Maybe you're in that dating phase, or maybe you're just divorced. She's going to give really good advice on that. And we're also going to talk about the different roles that children take on when under the influence of a narcissist. This is completely eye-opening. And the biggest question is how you can get rid of a narcissist, and even more importantly, what to do when you can't, when you're kind of stuck with them in your life. So we're talking about all of that and so much more. It's so, so good. And a quick note to you all, I've been reading your amazing anonymous letters that you have been submitting. I am going to return to that next week on our next episode, because today I just want to get straight to the interview. So enjoy.
Dr. Ramani, I am beyond excited to have you here with me today. It's been something that I've wanted to ask you forever, and I'm just so grateful that you are on this show, and I know that our audience is thrilled to be hearing from you as well. So welcome.
Summer, thank you so much for having me. And we've met in person before, and I'm just honored to finally have this conversation with you. So thank you.
Me too. So before we dive in, what I did was collect a bunch of questions, common questions that our audience has, because as you can imagine, in a blended family, there's already hard relationships happening between two co-parents. And oftentimes what I hear a lot is, my ex is a narcissist. I can't co-parent with him or her. So it's really diving into that today. But before we get into all of those questions, can you I'm so curious myself, in your career of being a psychologist, how did this become such an important topic for you to cover?
So I got interested in this initially through doing research. I'm a professor at California State University, Los Angeles, and as part of my program of research, really got interested in some patterns that people who were working in our clinic settings were observing. And basically that there were certain patients coming into the clinic and demanding almost a disproportionate amount of the resources. They would be yelling at the frontline staff, yelling at the receptionist, really treat the nursing staff badly. And I thought, that's interesting. So not only are these people sucking almost like the mental health out of this place and more of the bandwidth out of this clinic than anybody else, ultimately they may not even get very great care because everyone's so exasperated with them. And that led me then to a long program of research where I looked at personality and personality variables in conjunction with a lot of other stuff. And I specifically focus on HIV, which is a population I often worked on. But at the same time, I also had a clinical practice. And in my clinical practice, because I was already thinking about this in my research, more and more people kept coming in and talking about relationships characterized by invalidation and gaslighting and manipulation over and over again. And I thought, it's interesting. Let me just sort of go over what these patterns are. As psychologists, as clinicians, as mental health experts, we're very much taught not to sort of ever issue a diagnosis on someone we've never met. And even on someone we are working with, we to be very tentative. And this to me wasn't about diagnosis. It's like, you're dealing with a very rigid, difficult, dysregulated personality. Let me tell you how this breaks down. And it's not really going to change. And on and on and on. And I'm like, here's some things to read. And they did. And they would. And they said, oh my goodness, everything you've just said to me, it all is a real pattern. This is my life. Why didn't anyone ever tell me this before? I said, well, I'm telling you now. And that led to me writing books. But I'll be frank with you, Summer. I still was doing this work in relative obscurity and nobody really cared, which was fine by me. I loved my research. I loved my clients. I was helping them. I didn't care. And then there was the presidential election. And regardless of what your politics are, doesn't matter. So that's not a partisan comment. This word came into the media with a vengeance. Everybody was talking about it. And then all of a sudden people were doing that, connecting it to their relationships. And then I saw a lot of people giving out a lot of misinformation. And I was like, all right, I've been doing this for over 10 years. Let me step into this. And that's where my YouTube channel and my books and all of that came from, was really an attempt over the years to ensure that there's good information out there about this so people can make good decisions.
Well, I've been following, like I said, for at least a couple of years now, your work, and I've learned so many terms that I didn't know, but I knew the characteristics, I knew the behavior. And it started to really pull together to where I started to really identify things that were troubling to me from the past and saying, oh my gosh, I believe that this person is a narcissist, and and the thing is that people tend to throw that term around very easily without, sometimes it's like, I'm not really sure. I think you're saying that because of maybe certain characteristics, which is one of the first questions I have is, what exactly is it? Like, how is it defined? Because I do think that some people throw it around and sometimes it's not fair and sometimes it is totally accurate.
So a person who is got a narcissistic personality style, or a narcissistic personality style, I should say, is a style characterized by a lack of empathy, or at least inconsistent empathy, entitlement, grandiosity. These are people who are very superficial. They're chronically seeking out validation and admiration. They're deeply insecure. They're very arrogant. They can be very controlling. They're very sensitive to criticism, but they have no trouble dishing it out. They tend to be quite hypocritical. They don't like being told what to do. They can be really self-righteous. And so they're very vindictive. They need to dominate. They need to win. And there's subtypes. There's like 6 or 7 subtypes of narcissism. And those also present quite differently. And again, I threw that term insecure in there, but insecurity is sort of the core around which all of this spins. And it throws people off. They say, insecure. This person seems so charming, so charismatic, so confident. They're so successful. They've got so much swagger. I said, why do you think they need all those things? Because they need something. It's like it's putting on a lot of perfume when you don't smell nice. It's like they're covering something up, because the people who have sort of like a kind of a regular level of insecurity don't feel the need to shout it from the rooftops. They're okay. But because these folks are insecure, they really, really are. Their whole life is lived overcompensation.
So another thing that really spoke loudly to me, because I identified myself in some of these videos that I have seen, is the type of person that they attract or, kind of pull in. And It's very interesting. It's a little bit sad too when you realize it, so long afterwards. There's almost like there's a recovery mode that you go through once you're, away from that type of personality. What is that type that they attract, and what is the reasoning behind that?
Summer, no one's immune. I can't say that, there are certain types they definitely attract more. And when you hear the range of them, it's going to surprise you how much territory it covers. They attract people who are highly empathic, sometimes called empaths. They attract people who are rescuers. They attract people who are hyper forgivers. Everyone should be forgiven. Everyone has a light inside of them kind of ideation. People are very positive. They attract people who come from families that were characterized by narcissism. But in the same breath, they also attract people from very happy families, because people from happy families believe in love and people stay together and we can talk through anything and all that kind of stuff. And then they also attract people who have their own histories of trauma. And then finally, another group they really do prey upon are people who are going through transitions, people who are coming out of relationships, people who may have moved to a new city, people who are starting a new job. So people are kind of not on their game, right? They're a little destabilized. So they're much more easily to sort of it's easier to dominate them and manipulate them.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So how would one identify a narcissist? So if you're just hearing this and you're not sure, or you think that someone might be, is there a way that you can actually identify for the purpose of making sure that you protect yourself?
I would say that, is this person, pay attention. Are they listening to you? Or do they seem very distracted? And when they say, I'm sorry, I have ADHD. You just spent half an hour talking about yourself and you had plenty of attention then. So don't give me that. So it's almost as though they're sort of, someone else has something to say. It doesn't matter. Are they entitled? Do they expect special treatment when they go places? Do they get really grumpy and angry and lose patience? Especially in the era we've been living recently with the pandemic, things are harder. There were lines to get into stores. You have to wait to get a vaccine. I'm not waiting. I'm not doing this. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not doing any of these things. It's very entitled. It's very dismissive. That's another sign. I always tell people, watch how they drive. People who drive in a really dangerous, fast, cut people off way, the research has actually shown that's highly correlated with narcissism. Pay attention to how they talk about other people. Are they always sort of saying dismissive things about everyone? Because if they are, I can promise you when they're behind closed doors and you're not there, they're saying it about you. Are they always sort of pinning one group against another? A lot of I don't like that group and I don't like that group. And it's always and it's a lot of just sort of this triangulated gossipy kind of thing. That's another way that we might see that. You might also see it if a person has a very dysregulated temper. They may not have it to you, but you may see them have it with other people. You may overhear them having a work call, or you may overhear them or be with them when they're interacting with a server in a restaurant or in a grocery store. And people say, well, they were angry and it was no. There is, we all have our moments and our falls from grace, but we can even easily go back and say, I was rude to you. I apologize for that. They don't ever do that. And if you point that out to them, say, you weren't very nice to that person, then they'll rage at you. Those are the kinds of things that are sort of the early signs that we see. And a lot of people say, oh, maybe they're a little bit nervous because they're meeting me. I'm a new person. Maybe they actually do have ADHD. Okay.
Yeah. Can you actually call a narcissist out on being a narcissist?
You cannot. You cannot call them out. And the reason for this is this. Some of them actually suspect it, right? And it's very shameful for them. So they, as it is, listen, they can type those search words in as easily as you can, right? And they're reading it and they're like, okay. And so if you were to call them out, they may already be hypersensitive because they're thinking, I think this might be true. Or they're literally, if you call them out and say, I think you're narcissistic, inside of 5 minutes, they're going to say, no, it's you. You're the one who's the narcissist, or how dare you, or you're not a psychologist, or whatever their reasoning is. There is absolutely no point because it doesn't change. So I could see if calling someone out is going to lead to them addressing their behavior. But this is a pattern that is not amenable to change. So calling them out is really devolving into name calling. If you suspect that the patterns in your relationship are this toxic and recognize that the more toxic the pattern, the less likely it is to change, the real heavy lifting you need to do is figure out what exactly are you going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So here are some questions. Some of them were actually asked more than once, as you can imagine, in divorce situations. And I'll just kind of go in order here. One of the first ones is, my ex is a narcissist, and since our divorce, she is turning everyone against me. What do I do?
Okay, so that's a common place. So when during any kind of high conflict situation, such as a divorce, that process of the narcissistic player and the divorce turning everyone against you it's a manifestation of triangulation. Okay, so like I'm going to make this group go after this one person, right? It is a harnessing of something we call flying monkeys. It's the people who are like that are close to both people, but that the narcissist is often able to use gossip, innuendo, even lies to bring over to their way of thinking so that they will reject or be a united front against the narcissist. And it's something we call smear campaign, that you're going to speak badly. So I always say to people, you're already going through the devastation of a narcissistic divorce, which is its own form of nightmare. This is a chance to clean house. In one of these situations where the narcissist is successfully able to turn people against you, it's the time you take a real hard look at those people who did turn against you. Because if they could be turned so easily, they were never your people. And so a person where a narcissist is trying to get in and turn the person, then that is a case where they've known you for years, many, many years. They pick up the phone and say, hey, your ex is calling me up and saying all this stuff, and it's really, really bad. Can we talk about this? And you say, ay, let me explain to you what's going on. Because that person might say, I've known you all these years. This is not even in line with what I know about you. Can you please give some clarity to this? But if other people are just cutting you out, it's a bit like, once you start cleaning stuff out of your closet for Goodwill, you're like, no, I don't need this. I don't need this. You're just like out. If you could have fallen for that so easily, you are not my person. It is also, however, though, it does bring up a lot of grief. You feel like not only am I losing my marriage, I might be losing partial, obviously, custody of my children part of the time, and I'm losing now all these other people. But if they weren't healthy people, staying in an unhealthy relationship is what got you into this mess in the first place. Let this be the wake-up call that if it was so easy for you to reject me on the manipulations of another person, you are not a healthy person for me.
Right. Should the person respond in any way, try to defend themselves?
I would say if a person's thinking, do I defend myself to the flying monkeys? Only if they have the integrity to reach out to you.
Yeah.
If they don't have that integrity, why are you going to engage them?
Right.
They're showing themselves as not being very solid people in your life.
So if they're saying, hey, so-and-so saying this about you, wanted to talk to you about it, then you can, okay.
You can have the conversation. You never are going to defend yourself to a narcissist, ever.
Right.
That's a huge mistake. But to other people, they call me and say, this is what's being said to you. Say, okay, let me break down for you what has happened in the relationship, just to give you some context, and say, I am so sorry you've gotten drawn into this. This must feel so uncomfortable for you. So you show that person empathy and say, and thank you for coming to me, because most other people didn't.
Right. That's really good. Okay, here's another very popular one. This got asked a number of times. My ex is a narcissist, and I'm worried about his influence on my children. And this was also his or her. I just said his in this case, but my ex is a narcissist. I'm worried about the influence on my children. What can I do?
Okay, so this is probably the single most consistent question around people in these situations. I'm going to give you the good part of the answer. Well, I'll start with the pessimistic part of the answer, and I'll go to the good one. At least we'll end there. There are limits on what you can do. I mean, sadly, it comes down to a bad choice was made. And you can't undo that, right? Like this is, this person had a biological child with you, and they have some rights within the law. And there's not much you can do at that level, right? So what I do tell people is you are now like a single parent with an elephant on your back, because you now have to co-parent with somebody who may be doing terrible things, saying terrible things. You have to have realistic expectations. You are no longer going to be able to run your child's life like a well-oiled machine. You're going to understand that there's a house in which maybe they're eating Cheetos and going to bed at 11 o'clock and, playing video games all weekend. And that's the realistic expectation. It means that sadly at your home, you may need to double down on rules, on order, on getting homework done. It may mean that 95% of the homework gets done on your watch. and 5% on their watch. You are never going to convince the narcissistic co-parent to do it your way. And if you keep pushing, you're going to take a tense situation and turn it into an explosive device. So it's really about running your household in the best way possible, modeling empathy as much as you can, making sure that maybe you're the only one taking them to play dates. So really, ensuring that you keep your children's needs in your crosshairs. Too many people, when they're going through narcissistic divorces and narcissistic co-parent, fold up their arms and say, that's not fair. None of this is fair. No one ever said it was going to be fair. There is no fair here. You married a narcissist. And I got to tell you, and it's very unkind, but more than a few judges have said, this court does not exist to fix the mistake you made in marrying this person.
Wow. Yeah.
And so this is why I'm so like all the people with stars in their eyes who are stupid enough to marry someone that's charming. I'm like, no. You're looking for kind, not the rich, successful person. You're looking for the kind person. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about, Dr. But the courts can only do so much. Now, and then making this worse is the courts don't understand narcissism. So ultimately, they're making custody decisions. I mean, the conduct of one parent has to be egregious for the courts to really rule against custody for a parent. Parents want 50-50. If a parent wants 50-50, they're getting 50-50. Okay. Yeah. And this idea that you're going to roll into the courtroom and tell the judge, my partner's a narcissist, the judge is now going to consider you the problem partner. You're the difficult partner. You've now backed yourself into a corner. So what you've got to do is engage in radical acceptance, realistic expectations. The court is not going to help you out on this one. And if you really do have some evidence of egregious stuff, you have to have it documented. You can't roll into a courtroom and say, I just want to tell you the things that happened. They're going to be looking for documentation. You don't have that. It's not happening. So in terms of protecting your kids, creating realistic expectations, creating order in your household, modeling empathy, being, kind of keeping the trains running on time on your side, never speaking badly of the co-parent. But when the child comes up to you and says, I'm really uncomfortable, dad gets mad, he yells a lot, instead of like, yeah, I know dad's a rager, isn't he? No, you don't say that. You say, talk to me about how you feel. Like, how are you doing? I don't like it. Like, why is he like that? And say, then you use what I always consider the royal we. And by the royal we, I mean, grown-ups kind of sometimes don't have our houses in order. And we sometimes don't know how to deal with our emotions. What I want you to remember is anyone's issues with it, any grown-ups' difficulties with expressing emotions, it's not about you. It's about them. By using the we, us, grown-ups, you're using this collective terminology, which is saying we adults are actually pretty damn flawed. But the real punchline on that is, and this is not your fault, because that's what the child needs to know. This is not your fault. And then, the child will say, I don't like being here. I don't like being here. I don't like being at the other parent's house. It's really essential that people also, if they can, have their children in therapy, because then the therapist is a place that can be monitoring that for the kids. But I'll be frank with you, even a therapist report, this isn't always about preferences. A child saying, I don't like this, because, many times a court will, if they even try to take people back in for custody, will say, this is just a kid who's trying to manipulate the situation. They'll often pathologize the child. So I do really think it's about keeping things as peaceable as possible. Some people will also get wonky about like, oh, I can't believe it. My ex is now seeing someone else and wants to, throw the kids on me every weekend. Good. Take it.
Yeah.
Take it. Any extra minute you're having with your kids, a good minute, right? So some people get so caught up in the fairness of it all, they forget, they want to keep jousting with them. Like, no, I said, at some point, if you don't keep getting in the mud with them, many narcissistic people get bored with their kids. Because kids, I have kids, trust me. It's a handful. It's the lot. So they're thinking, okay, this is kind of getting in the way of my mojo. I can't do my thing. You gracefully take those kids back and document the heck out of everything. On 4 custody weekends, I ended up with the kids. Like you are documenting, ideally using a family communication app.
Yes.
Like Family Wizard or something like that. So That way you will have it fully documented, that in a way that can be entered into legal record. It's understood. So you really, really got to be on your game, and you've got to let go of ordinary conceptions of justice, and you've got to be consistent for your kids, and you never can speak badly about their other parent, and be that place of empathy for them.
Hey guys, did you know that you can text us now? Like if you want to be the first to know if we're going live or just launched a new episode, or maybe that we just went out on a date or had a fight, who's right, who's wrong, maybe we ate too much for dinner or missed a workout. No, seriously, we want to share more of what's going on in our lives, and we want to make sure that you don't miss out on anything new. So send a quick hello to 760-389-3722, and let's stay connected. All right, back to the show.
You're saying everything that I absolutely 100,000% agree with. And it's so huge not to badmouth. And there's so many things, and everything that you said is really about, because I think the biggest worry here is my child going to become a narcissist with having that influence? And if you can consistently show the empathy, so that they understand that, and really relating to them, like, how does that make you feel? And I love the we, because that's so true. We're all, as adults, whether a narcissist or not, we're imperfect. And we as adults do mess up in ways that we handle situations. And I think all of that just really stresses the child not to take it personally. It's not because of them. There's no reason for them to feel guilty or that they've done something wrong. And when you badmouth and do all those things that you'd said, it's not making them go, oh, then I like you better than dad or mom. It's actually making them feel worse about themselves,
Right. But there's no guarantee the child won't become narcissistic.
But there isn't.
You can be on your A game.
Exactly. So you can at least know that you've done your best, but it's true. And I mean, and that's a hard question. I don't even know, what the answer to that is. If there are parents that have said, I'm starting to see signs in my child of becoming a narcissist.
Well, so a couple things to keep in mind. The main symptomatology we see in children who grow up with a narcissistic parent, either in a divorced or non-divorced home, is anxiety. It's the inconsistency, the conditionality, the feeling not enough, the entitlement, the tension they sense in a parent's marriage, and all of that. The primary symptom we see going into adolescence and into adulthood is extreme anxiety. Okay. However, a subset of children, yes, they will go on to become narcissistic. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Narcissism developmentally is actually a pretty complicated space. It's not, people aren't born this way. They can be born with a difficult temperament, and that difficult temperament then interacts with the world in a way that might sort of bring these narcissistic qualities out. But this is pretty much not something inborn. This is very developmental. It has to do with early development, early attachments. But a child learns regulation, the consistency in the home, the availability of caregivers. Remember, a parent going through a narcissistic marriage, even when their children are young, no matter how devoted they're trying to be, they're going to be a little distracted because of their distress, and that is going to impact attachment. But then as that child comes up through adolescence, we live in a very material world. The narcissistic parent knows how to bring out, like, if they have financial resources, all of a sudden there's a car, and I'd be happy to pay your rent in this apartment. And now all of a sudden money comes into the picture. Once that starts coming into the picture, that can even leave a parent who feels like they had it all figured out with their kid. It was going well, that their child's head gets turned. And here's the other thing I caution parents. Until your kid is over 25, I don't want you to use the word narcissistic. Personality patterns remain fluid, flexible, and continue to develop until really the prefrontal cortex of the brain kind of clicks in permanently, and that's around the age of 25. And while brain continues to always grow, the big stuff happens before 25, and then we're good. So when a parent says my 20-year-old is narcissistic, I said, it sounds like your 20-year-old is being 20. Because adolescents are the most egocentric creatures on the planet.
Totally selfish. Yeah.
Totally selfish. And they're supposed to be. The thing is, what we've got to remember, that this is a time of separation and individuation. It's a time when peers matter more. It's a time when their empathy for those who have their own age group is far more pronounced than it is for their adults in their world and all of that. The funny thing about narcissism is you can always tell the story backwards, but you can't tell the story forward. And what I mean by that is when you've got a 17 or 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, sullen, nasty, unempathic, entitled, difficult teenager, it's a wait and see to see if they're going to still be like that into their late 20s and 30s and forward. But when you have a difficult, nasty, sullen, entitled, unempathic person at 30, they were like that at 15. Do you see what I'm saying? It tells backwards.
Yes.
It doesn't tell forward. Yeah.
Right. And that is true. I mean, how many times have we heard stories? I was a rotten teen. I was this, I was that. Yeah. And then there's, some type of development, some type of shift that happens. And maybe this one was a little bit answered before with how we identify one, but some people saying, how can I be sure I don't end up with another narcissist?
That's a really, really good question, because I have something I ask all clients to do, which is a 12-month detox. And I mean, that detox starts the day the papers are signed, and whatever state or country you live in, they're like, the law recognizes you as two perfect strangers. Okay. Yeah. Because anyone who's been divorced will tell you, we lived apart for 3 years, but something happened the day those papers were signed. There was a psychological click. The 12-month detox is this. People need 12 months to assert their preferences, to not make a single allowance for another human being other than their kids. Eat crackers in bed, watch French films on their head, eat ice cream for dinner when they don't have their kids, do what they need to, watch what they need to, not to be selfish, but to become reacquainted with their preferences. The difficulty with a narcissistic relationship is it completely separates you from you. And by having what I call the 12-month detox, it's a period of time where you can start rewriting how you talk to yourself and about yourself. It's a place to work through the grief, the self-blame so many are plagued with. What do I like to eat? Like, no, I actually didn't like that kind of pizza. And no, I don't want to watch football on the weekend. And no, I don't like films that have subtitles like you. And I don't like wine. And you're like, oh my goodness, like these are the things I like. Because what that means is, fortified with that, the next time you meet someone and they say red or white, you'll be like, yeah, actually, I don't like wine, because you've practiced that not liking for a while. But if you roll from one into another, those self-censoring kinds of voices that stop you from gaining your authenticity. And I'm not saying everyone's going to get to their authentic self in a year, but they're sure as heck going to be a lot more likely to get there than the person who I've heard so many people say, oh my gosh, I can't do a 12-month detox. The last 5 years of this marriage, I've been alone. I said, I understand that. But for the last 5 years, you still had the identity of being in a relationship with this person. In 12 months, you can learn so much. You'll travel to the places you want, do what you want. But again, a narcissistic relationship is a masterclass on over-compromising for another person's needs. For a year, let your only compromises be for your kids. And then you will be in a better place to be what I call then being much more discerning. Every single person who's ever been in a narcissistic relationship looks back at that relationship and said, yeah, I saw the red flags the second week, but I ignored them. I justified them. I really wanted to get married. My friends liked this person. They were super successful. They look so great on paper. The list goes on and on and on, right? Yeah. The red flags were there. No one ever says, I saw the first red flag 12 months in. No one ever says that. They were there from the beginning. And so this time, when the red flags come up again, to give yourself permission to say, mm-mm. And I will tell people, you're going to throw back a few fish that were big enough to keep. That's okay. It's worth throwing off the risk of the other. And then it's also getting comfortable for looking for qualities that you didn't originally value, like kindness, compassion, respect, humor, not being so snobby and judgy and all the stuff that was likely happening in your narcissistic relationship, and maybe not care so much about credentials and all these sort of superficial characteristics that often also sometimes, but not always, got people stuck in those relationships. And so I think that in that 12-month detox, I do advise people, if they're able to afford it, to get therapy with somebody who understands narcissistic abuse, which is a smaller percentage of therapists, and work it through and talk it through. Because sometimes that therapist starts to become a sounding board for when you date. I've got many clients who say, okay, this is happening. And I'm like, okay, my red flags are going up. Can we talk about that? Yeah. And we'll kind of go back and forth for them. And they'll say, yeah, I thought so. And so people will say, I'm so used to making justifications that I'm just doing it again. And I say, watch your justifications. Just watch them. Write down all the ones you made in your original relationship. You're going to make them again.
Yeah. Well, this kind of leads into another question, which is having boundaries. So in a co-parenting situation, you're divorced now, you're co-parenting together, so you still have to communicate. I totally am a fan of My Family Wizard and apps like that. But I also know that I know of narcissistic personalities that are like, refuse, nope, not doing it, and if it's not court ordered, not doing it, And so I know that can be really helpful. And, we talk a lot about on our podcast, we talk about having boundaries, and how for a more successful co-parenting relationship. It's harder to do with a narcissist, So what are some tips or what are some things that people can do to protect themselves so that while they're going through this 12-month detox, they're still not feeling like this person's still got a hold on them?
So you will feel like this person's got a hold on you because in some ways they do. You have to communicate for your kids. In fact, a friend of mine, a woman named Tina Swithin, who has a website called onemomsbattle.com, though men can use it too. She is a major family court advocate and has lived experience in this area. She trains people to be coaches in narcissistic divorces. She has something called Yellow Rock. She's like, Gray Rock is probably a little too extreme for co-parenting because it's not a good model for children to see. So Yellow Rocking is a little bit more warmth, like, oh, how are you? Oh, wow, you got a new car. It's really nice. Even though you're thinking, oh my God, you're telling me you drafted me in this divorce is what you're thinking. And you bought yourself a new car. It's like, wow, your new car looks really nice. Or, I like what you've done with your garden. Or the kids told me you just got back from a vacation. Like Yellow Rock, because it's a good thing for your kids to see, unless it's literally impossible. And I know in a percentage of cases it is. But if you can, that's one place to start. The other place with boundaries is that, ideally, you've created a parenting plan as part of your divorce where things are very clearly laid out. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes it has to be down to the minute, right? 5 p.m. this, there, and 3 p.m. pick up there and all of this other stuff. And you do need to document. You want to, even if they won't use the apps, even if they won't use anything that's court ordered, you want everything in writing. So you may send them the text. Tonight, Johnny has the karate class. It goes till 7, but then we said he could have pizza. They'll pick up the call. Okay. And then, but at least you have your piece. Then I'd say, follow it up with a text. Okay. After our conversation, I'm just confirming you didn't want Johnny. They're going to get incensed at you for doing this. But now at least it's in text. If you do need it, for part of, if you end up having to go back to court, you have it. So that's one way to handle it. The other is to remain as transparent on communication as possible. In some cases, that might be a summary email. They may not read it, but at least you've done your part and sent the information on. Where this gets the most challenging, Summer, is when you have very young children who can't advocate for themselves, but are still slowly starting activities like 5, 6, 7. I'd say really the toughest part is between like 4 and 10, because the kids really can't fight their own fights, but they're still kind of in the world. From 10, 11 on, they can already start saying like, hey, I could go to pizza after my karate class kind of thing. And now the parent has to deal with the kid. So that becomes a different kind of a battle. Obviously, adolescence, it's a whole different conversation. With the babies, right? They're portable. But I think that it is having the communication down. But you know what it comes down to, though, with the boundaries, too? It's realistic expectations. They're going to violate the boundaries morning, noon, and night. That's the exhaustion of this. No matter what you do, no matter how right you have it, it's for them, it's always limit testing. It's always, yes, I'm going to push a little bit more. I'm going to push a little bit more. I'm going to push a little bit more. They just want to see how far they can take it.
Yep. It's very true. And it's like that always wanting to be in control of the situation. Here's an interesting question. My ex got remarried and her new husband is a narcissist. I'm worried about how this will affect my children.
That's a very, very good question, and very concerning one, because you think to yourself, how do I protect my child. Like, listen, it's like the devil you know is always better than the devil you don't. The devil you don't is the new partner, right?
Yeah.
And so what we don't know is, in this case, I don't know if the ex partner is also narcissistic. So this person is saying my ex
we don't
married
know.
someone narcissistic. So they may have actually had a perfectly good co-parenting setup. And now this person's married someone difficult. So bridge number one is assuming that the ex may not be narcissistic, is to say there's some patterns in this relationship. Like, I'm happy for you, but there's some patterns in this relationship that are antagonistic enough. Use words like antagonistic. They don't sting as much as narcissistic, that are giving me some concern that, the kids are actually struggling a little bit with it. And I just wanted to share that with you. You're going to get some pushback. Oh, you're jealous. Oh, and especially when the ex-spouse, they will probably make this mistake of talking to the new narcissistic spouse and saying, oh, this came up, and oh, they're still in love with you, and that's why they're doing this. And so I would say for your kids, if your kids are in this situation and you attempt some level of communication, if that's possible, with your ex-partner, is then to do some of the work we would do in any narcissistic setup: empathy, compassion, routines. But however, if your children are bringing back to you real concerns, yelling, screaming, verbal abuse, it may be time to call your attorney and pull this thing back into court, because you may have a little bit more leverage when the person exerting the harm, it's not the ex-partner, it's this new player in their life, where you have a little bit more concern about their interest, even in protecting your child. So you may have a little bit more place in each, and that will vary state by state. I would really advise people to call or to speak with an attorney to find out what happens in these situations and what possibilities might exist.
Yeah. I have one final question from the listeners, but I have a question just to insert in there. And that is, because I think it's important to cover, and I know it could go on. It's a big topic, but maybe just an overview of the roles that children tend to play when they have a narcissistic parent, the roles that they take on.
So here's where it's interesting. The children take these on in part, but the narcissistic parent often puts these roles onto the children. I think that we want to be very careful with understanding that, because some of the roles I've often highlighted, for example, is a scapegoat. No child ever signs up to be a scapegoat. That's done to them, right? So they're invariably, in a narcissistic family, is a scapegoated child. The scapegoated child is often a child who either may remind the narcissist, maybe of the co-parent, someone else in their life they don't like, or it doesn't look the way they want, doesn't do the things they want, doesn't measure up doesn't sort of bring the narcissistic supply the way the narcissistic parent wants. Another sort of family role, I guess we'd call, is what I call the fixer. This is the kid who's always trying to make it right. Like, no, mommy, daddy didn't mean that. Daddy didn't mean that. Or this is my fault. I'm the one who left it. Like, it's that kid who's always trying to broker the peace. These fixer kids definitely go on to tremendous anxiety and sometimes literal obsessive compulsive symptoms. Then there's what I call the handmaid or the butler child. This is the child sensing the tension in the home, actually tries to make things right. Like they try to keep the house clean. They may become very parentified. Narcissistic parents aren't up to the intensity of the game. Either they overparent or they underparent. But what they're not able to do is hit that sweet spot in the middle. And so in more than a few narcissistic family systems, the handmaid butler child is the one who steps in, because many times narcissistic parents are sort of distracted by what's happening in their life. And especially if that handmaid child is older, they may sort of take responsibility for trying to protect their younger siblings. Another role in the narcissistic family, of course, is the golden child. Again, the golden child is anointed as such by the narcissistic parent. This is often the child that brings more supply. They're, by the way they look, by the way they perform, they may be very athletic, they may be very good at school, they may resemble the narcissistic parent. Whatever it is, that golden child is the one who can do no wrong, and it often is used against the scapegoat as well. And then we have the truth teller. The truth teller is the kid who sees it and gets it actually at a pretty young age. And there's something about that kid that's smart and wise and often quite quiet. And their eyes are big, not literally big, like they're taking it all in. And interestingly, the truth teller is a kid who can often leave the narcissistic parent feeling very uncomfortable, as though that 5-year-old child can see right through them. And for that reason, many a truth-telling child got treated like a scapegoat. And so these different roles are often the child either trying to find a way to survive in the system, trying to way to maybe protect one of the parents, or their roles they were anointed with, like especially the scapegoat, the golden child, as per the capricious kind of dismissive way that a narcissist would view their children as merely being tiny little vessels of narcissistic supply or antagonism in their world.
Yeah. And when you say supply, you're talking about they're feeding, that's what they feed off of because they use that person to make them feel, to fuel their grandiose feeling.
Yeah. And many a narcissist out there likes to have kids and like, look at all my kids. They put them on social media all the time. I'm such a great parent. Look at us. They wear the same clothes. We're so great. The matching t-shirts. And yet you open the front door and you're like, oh my God, this family's a mess, matching t-shirts and all. And so, there's really about putting on a show. The children become a brand in a way, but in that branded space, it's just, there's a lot, especially narcissistic parents are often very distracted by their own thing, their own work, their own socializing, their own stuff. And so they almost want to, if they could, they'd probably keep their kids in a box and parade them out when they need the supply and then put it back up on the shelf.
Oh, sad. This final question, which is probably a very obvious question, and I wish you could wave the magic wand and do it, but in some certain situations, maybe you can. How do I get rid of a narcissist in my life?
So I'm assuming you're not married to this person. So obviously sometimes you can't. The ties that bind you are impossible. They're familial, employment, shared business, co-parents, right? So let's take that out. If you have one though, where you can, I always say you want to make a very graceful, very quiet exit. There is no need for a big showdown. There's no need for a big conversation. This is really, you want to let the fruit die on the vine. You're going to slowly kind of exit out. It can be very compassionate. You can even sort of fall on your own sword and say, oh gosh, life's gotten so busy. They may lash out at you like, what kind of friend are you? Say, I know I am so busy. I'm really not a good friend to anyone these days. Remember, your goal is to get out, right? By whatever means necessary. It's like, how much do I need to bribe the border guard to get out of this country? Because I'm doing it. I'm not a briber by nature, but I need to get out of here. And so the bribe here is really one of, I'm just going to do this quietly. I'm not going to engage as much. Where this gets complicated, Summer, if this is somebody who's used to having frequent contact with you. Right.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of maybe not getting in touch as much, saying, I'm really getting quite busy, indicating like, I've got just other things that are commanding my attention right now. And then they're going to get mad at you. I think the hardest part of stepping away from a narcissistic relationship is for a minute being okay with somebody not liking you. And a lot of people don't like that feeling. I'm like, well, you don't like this person, so it's not important, but they're like, it really bothers them. So it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable, knowing that this person's getting increasingly angry. Are you able to tolerate that last tantrum for them? Because they're probably going to throw one. They may send you those long texts where you have to push the button because it fills up the whole page of your phone. I don't know what those are called, but I call them narcissistic texts. So they send you those ragey texts.
Yes, exactly. Pages. Like, you're not responding to me. And
you're not responding. And it's like, and then it's like a whole symphony of every failing you've ever had, or they want to call. Listen, at that point, then, it's just sort of like, I think, you can say something really annoying. Like, I think the universe is taking us in different directions. They'll curse at you a few times and then you may be done. They'll probably smear campaign you a little. They may flying monkey you a little bit. You know your reasons. And so you can, if someone says, hey, how come you and such are no longer spending time, say, you know what, it was a change in direction. You don't even need to get in the mud about it. Right. Exactly. Like I always say to people, like, you don't need to get in the mud. Someone else will discover it soon enough. And anyone who's wise will have seen what that is. So, what that pattern was. But again, quiet, graceful, compassionate, slow exit. They're going to scream at you. And you just have to be prepared for that.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So many good things. I know that there's probably so many more questions. So you're just at Dr. Ramani on
Dr. Ramani, everything on YouTube, on social
Instagram, on social media,
website, everywhere. Yeah.
Listeners, I have to tell you, it is the most amazing content. You're going to find, you just have a video for everything in all different situations. It's incredible. They're usually around, I don't know, average of like 10 minutes long, something like that.
Yeah,
like you just
10 to 15 minutes. Yeah.
It's incredible. And if anything, it's when you are recovering from a relationship with a narcissist, if anything, it really validates and clarifies thoughts that you may have had. Because I think if you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, there's times when you're like, what is wrong with me? What have I done? You believe the things that have been told about you. You're not this enough. You're not bad enough, whatever it is. And so watching your videos has helped me in so many ways to realize, oh my gosh, that wasn't me. That was, like it's gaslighting, things like that, that I've just like, wow, I never even realized that's what was being done. It's incredible material. I appreciate it so much and all the work that you do, and for spending this last almost hour with me. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It was my pleasure, Summer. Thank you so much. Thank you for your wonderful questions too. I hope they're helpful to the people listening. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. And we like to say, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you love, and be bold enough to share it with someone you don't. See you next time.